the President speaks on the State of the Union, discussing executive orders, immigration, the gender pay gap, and the minimum wage. I'm Daniel Mushala, and this is The Square Circle. Hello and welcome to The Square Circle. I'm your host, Daniel Mushala. Today, joining us are co-Stangler of In These Times, Alex Lawson of Social Security Works, freelance writer Julia Shaw, and Lori Sanders of the R Street Institute. President Obama gave his annual State of the Union address this week, and while there's much to discuss, we're only going to talk about four of the most prominent issues. First, the president said,
"But America does not stand still, and neither will I. So wherever and whenever I can take steps without legislation to expand opportunity for more American families, that's what I'm going to do."
This sounds like he intends to issue more executive orders. Julia Shaw, is this a runaround the Constitution? Can you blame him for wanting to go around Congress that won't cooperate with him?
Look, it's the president's job to execute the laws, not to create it when he doesn't like the ones that he's been given. The president has shown a remarkable willingness to act outside his constitutional authority and congressional authorization. We've seen this several times throughout his administration. We saw this most notably with the recess appointments. This is very disconcerting, and it's the president's job to execute the law, not to make it up as it goes along.
Alex?
I disagree. The president's job is to follow the will of the people who put him in office, and right now the Congress is fundamentally broken, and that is a strategy that has been put in place to stop the president from being able to do his job. So what the president is talking about is using the legal authority that he does have to accomplish the things that voters put him in office to do.
If I could just, jump in here also. I mean, I actually wouldn't dispute the fact that, this administration has acted unconstitutionally. That's a discussion you can talk about NSA programs, a whole host of other issues. But in terms of the actual executive order issue, if you actually look, you have to go back more than 100 years to find another president that has issued executive orders at a lower rate than President Obama. That's Grover Cleveland. So there's a whole host of issues where the administration actually could be, President Obama could be issuing more executive orders, and he hasn't. You think of an instance like, what comes to mind immediately is ending workplace discrimination for LGBT people in this country. He talks about marriage a lot, but right now there's 20 states where you can be fired for being gay or transgender, and he has the authority to not end it in those states, but among federal contractors, which is what he just did with the minimum wage. So that's one issue. There's a whole host of issues where we could be actually seeing more executive orders, executive action.
Right, but the issue isn't how many you're issuing. The issue is what type you're issuing. And I'll grant you that a lot of the things he's done are perfectly within his authority. But he's done some things that I think is perfectly reasonable to put congressional Republicans a bit, to make them feel a bit uncomfortable. I mean, the issue isn't whether he's issued 100, it isn't whether he's issued 500. It's what he's doing with them. And I mean, we certainly don't want to hold the bar of, well, he's not putting Americans in internment camps, which we've done with executive action before. So that's good, but that's a pretty low bar of comparison. I mean, when you think about the fact that he selectively chooses to not enforce some laws, like we're going to recognize gay marriages in Utah, even though the state of Utah isn't doing that. I'm going to selectively choose which type of illegal immigrants I want to deport. Those are the type of things that if you really want to work with Congress, say, on illegal immigration, then picking that strategy isn't really the best way to accomplish what could be a reasonable goal in his term of actually getting immigration reform across.
And I also think we should address the issue of Congress, because Congress is also elected by the American people. When Barack Obama was elected in 2012, they also re-elected a House and they re-elected a portion of the Senate. The way the American people deliberates is through Congress. They call up their representative, they voice their opinion. So by cutting Congress out of the process, Barack Obama is cutting the American people out of the deliberative process. He's replacing the deliberation of 535 members of Congress that the American people have elected with his judgment. That's a problem. That's not the president's job.
I think the funny thing is that this president has actually really tried to work with Congress time and time and time and time again. And if anyone has cut themselves out or cut Congress out of the process, it's Congress themselves who have said we should be not judged on the laws that we pass. I can't remember who said it, but the laws that we repeal, the laws that we don't allow to go through. You're talking about a Congress that has just systematically been obstructionists. And I don't know, I agree with lots of the things Cole said. Issue by issue, the president is not talking about going outside of his legal authority as the president of the United States.
I think he has. I think in some cases it's very clear that he has, and I don't think you can say that he's worked well with Congress. Commentators on both sides of the aisle. I just actually had this discussion on Al Jazeera the other night, and the EVP of the Center for American Progress admitted that people on both sides of the aisle think that President Obama does not do a very good job of doing meetings with Congress, reaching out, inviting them to the White House. I mean, this is not just a conservative complaint. Liberal commentators say that he should do a better job. He is the president, and it is his job to sell his agenda to Congress, and he's not doing that. It is your job to do the handshaking.
I agree that he hasn't done a good job of it, but the fact that he has tried to let Congress move his agenda forward, and he has actually allowed that process to take place, This
is not how our constitutional structure works. It's not that the president tells Congress everything that he wants to do and then Congress just does his bidding. Congress has its own agenda. Congress is a separate institution with separate authority from the executive. He's not the president is not the errand boy of Congress, nor is Congress the servant of the president.
Exactly. And when George Bush went outside of his authority and issued a lot of executive orders, the Democrats in Congress were just as angry. It was just as bad when George Bush does it. It's bad when President Obama does it. Presidents should follow the process because it exists for a reason.
I mean, and there's also a lot of the policies we're talking about that maybe me and Alex would disagree on this, but a lot of the policies that we consider to be, unconstitutional, lawless policies. You talk about the undeclared drone wars right now that are being waged, across the Middle East, something like that. That's not done through executive action, even executive order. That's just something that the administration has decided to.
Order.
Okay, the kill list, for instance, yeah. So there's a general kind of lawlessness that the administration has kind of adopted, and that seems to be regardless, whether or not it's done directly through an executive order. So there's a broader discussion.
Wonderful. I'd like to remind our audience that you can submit your questions to our guests through our website, www.publicsquare.net. And we'll answer as many as we have on air live by the end of the show. Another big issue in the State of the Union is immigration. The president said,
finally, if we're serious about economic growth, it is time to heed the call of business leaders, labor leaders, faith leaders, law enforcement, and fix our broken immigration system.
The sticking point, of course, is pathway to citizenship, or as some will call it, amnesty. Conservatives argue that legalizing unlawful immigrants would undermine the rule of law by rewarding illegal activity. Alex Lawson, is this the case?
Look, what is contributing to any sort of lawlessness is a fundamentally broken immigration system, which actually is set up in a way that it tacitly endorses people coming into this country illegally, and that has so many negative consequences for business, for labor, driving down wages. If anything, selective enforcement of a broken immigration system is what encourages a sort of lawless non-understanding of how you should do something, right? I mean, if somebody knows they can come into America, get hired, get paid, and that's not enforced, and the businesses that do hire undocumented workers are not held accountable, that is what is encouraging law breaking. Now, if we set up a law, a comprehensive immigration reform that actually makes it a legal process for people who want to work, they want to grasp the American dream, they want to come here, better themselves and their families, and at the same time better America, that's something that we should do. And that's something that I think there's broad agreement. Doesn't matter what letter is after a person's name, Democrat, Republican, Independent. That's something that the American people agree on. Fairness is a deeply held American value, and the fact that undocumented workers right now are preyed upon by really terrible business practices, such as letting them do the work and then not paying them, or even calling in an ICE raid to deport them before they get paid. Situations like that, that's lawlessness. A law that encourages immigration to happen in a responsible manner is the definition of a law.
Lori?
I'm going to say this. There's not many places that I actually disagree there. I am a huge proponent of comprehensive immigration reform. I could even be so far as to maybe endorse open borders. I mean, I think that we should really let people come in. America is, a beacon of hope for the world, and I think that that's something that we should be willing to share with anyone who is willing to undertake the massive risk to, uproot from where you are and come here and try to make it go with your family. I think that's beautiful. And really, at the end of the day, economics is what controls whether or not people want to come to America. When we have a strong economy, they want to come contribute to that. When we have a weak economy, less people want to come contribute. I don't think that there's a lot of good arguments against comprehensive immigration reform.
Cole?
I mean, I think, another thing to point out is the limited parameters of the debate, like you said, I think we're having a discussion about whether or not to tie immigration status to, having a job, being able to hold down a job, and that's seen as, kind of a liberal idea. I always think, because this is something that I had studied when I was undergrad, I did a thesis about immigration in France and immigrant political movements. And when they tried to have that legislation in France, workers went on strike, and it was the beginning of a, massive, pro-immigrant movement, because that was something that was just inconceivable. So I think it's just interesting to point out the parameters have shifted so far, where this is now seen as a a radical, maybe a liberal demand to ask that people be able to stay in this country on the condition that they hold down a job. So to me, that does not strike me as a particularly progressive or ambitious agenda. So it's just recognizing that.
Jewel?
So the only issue in the immigration thing that I want to bring up is one, I'm glad you kind of pointed out that there's difficulty in the president actually implementing and executing the law. I think it's a problem when the president is not executing the law, or executing the law contrary to Congress's demand. The other thing that we should be concerned about is the idea of pushing towards comprehensive big bills rather than small bills, as both sides of this table can agree that there are issues where both left and right, Republican and Democrats, agree. It's better to pursue policies, I think, on a smaller case-by-case basis. That way you don't have the problem where you have this great big comprehensive bill where every half of the things no one else wants, and then you're putting a president again in a situation of selective enforcement. So I think in terms of solving one problem step at a time would be a better approach. There are problems with the system, but trying to do a comprehensive fix everything all at once, that tends to lead to more problems than it solves.
Okay, wonderful. One of the issues that received a big ovation was the gender pay gap. Here's the president.
It is time to do away with workplace policies that belong in a Mad Men episode. This year, let's all come together, Congress, the White House, businesses from Wall Street to Main Street, to give every woman the opportunity she deserves, because I believe when women succeed, America succeeds.
Cole Stangler, what exactly are these Mad Men policies the president was referring to?
I think the most basic one that he's referring to, and he said this in his speech, is that for every dollar that a man makes in this country, 77 cents goes to women. So that's the most basic one. There's just a basic gap right there. The other thing, which the president kind of obliquely referenced, was the fact that we don't have maternity leave in this country. We don't have paid maternity leave. And the United States is the only industrialized country in the world that doesn't have mandatory paid maternity leave. In fact, there's only 4 countries in the world that don't have maternity that do not have paid maternity leave policies at all, and that's the United States, Swaziland, Lesotho, and Papua New Guinea. So we're in a pretty strange camp there when it comes to those policies. And so, the president made a reference to it in his speech. He hasn't really strongly advocated for paid maternity leave before. So with a lot of things, this president, it's a lot of rhetoric, and we'll see, if he actually makes a push for drastically addressing that gap.
Julie?
I'm shocked that we're still using this wage gap myth. I mean, on the left and the right, we've admitted that's a myth. That it's not comparing apples to apples here. We're looking at number of hours that women work are different from numbers of hours that men work. Both the left and the right have debunked that myth. So I'm shocked that we keep putting that out as truth.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I think most of the research shows that the pay gap tends to come from different choices. And I actually personally, as a woman, as a mother, as a full-time employee, am really, really glad that I live in America where I can choose to make whatever I want to make of myself. I could go home and work tomorrow, or I could go home and take care of my son tomorrow, or I could return to work tomorrow. What we should be advocating for in America is not equal outcomes for women and men, where women and men are paid the exact same thing at all times, but equal opportunity, where every woman, every little girl can grow up and say, this is what I want to do and this is what I want to achieve, and she has the ability to do that.
Do you think we should have paid maternity leave in this country?
But we're talking about it as though nobody gets any maternity leave whatsoever. That's not the case. We're talking about whether or not we're making it a mandatory requirement. That's a different issue here. There are also articles out there talking about countries that do have mandatory paid maternity leave, and that means that companies are less likely to hire women because they don't want to have to risk losing her to maternity leave for an unspecified or a long period of time, and then risk not having her come back. I mean, we want to, as what my colleague was saying, you want women to be able to have options, and you don't want to put employers in a situation where they don't want to hire women.
I'm sorry. You want to talk about options. If you're a mother, trying to care for a child, and you're making, most low-wage work in this country also point out are women. You're making a low-wage job, which is what most people in this country have to deal with. What kind of options do you have if you have to work 40 hours a week?
Actually, personally, because I had my son when I was 20 years old, and I was a low-wage employee who was also trying to go to college, and it is hard. I'm going to be honest with you. It is hard. It is not easy to be a low-wage female worker who's trying to take care of a son and take care of your household and make ends meet. It's not easy. But that doesn't mean that we need legislation to solve that problem. I don't want to seem as if I am unaware of the difficulty that people go through, right? But we want those women to have access to work. The most important thing that a woman can have when she needs to take care of a small child and she wants a job is access to a job. And the type of policies that make it less likely for companies to want to hire her is actually the most unfair thing that you could do.
So companies would be less likely to hire workers?
Yeah, research shows that when you have paid maternity leave and women are more likely to, there's a risk there, right? Every company knows if I hire this person, if she has a child, there's a reason, right, that women sometimes feel the need to take off their wedding rings when they go to interviews. It's sad, but it's true.
Well, as a small business owner, I can tell you that I've never made a single decision of hiring or anything like that based on any calculation other than is this the best person for the job. So I think that that's a canard that a whole bunch of businesses are going to start not hiring women
but
because
shows that in countries where there's more
you have to hire women. They make up half the workforce.
It reduces employment for women.
If you look, let's talk about Walmart, which is owned right now by I think there are 4 of the top 8 richest people in the world. And that's the Walton family, and they make their money, a lot of it is subsidized by the American taxpayer because we pay for the assistance programs that people who have these minimum wage jobs at Walmart have to take in order to make ends meet. The mythical senior who chooses to go back to work, that choice, I put air quotes around that because I don't think it's a choice. It is a reality that millions of Americans do not have enough money to live on right now. And that the jobs that are available after Wall Street crashed the world economy in 2008, after decades of offshoring jobs and giving tax preferences to companies who ship our jobs overseas, we're faced with a situation where the jobs that are available for people are poverty wage jobs. These are not jobs that pay enough for people to live on. And, when you have a document from Walmart, from McDonald's, from other corporations that pay minimum wage that tells their employees how to access public assistance programs, that is the epitome of an upward redistribution of wealth. That is taking our tax dollars and putting it into the pockets of 4 of the richest people in the world.
Lori?
Okay, so I'll agree with you that I think there should be far less tax loopholes. I think we should have simple flat tax rates. I don't think we should have special carve-outs to favor certain industries, to favor certain companies. I mean, I think we can completely agree there, and I think it would be a totally...
Except that I agree in progressive taxation, not a flat tax rate.
Well, yeah, I'm actually not for flat taxes either, for the record. I think a progressive tax rate is completely fine. And I'm perfectly with you that we could take some of the money that we get from eliminating those loopholes and plow it back into other much more important programs. We could plow it into jobs training programs that will better prepare people for the new world of work that we find ourselves in. There are all sorts of things you could do it, but to say that we're going to raise the minimum wage as a way to take care of that just still to me seems incredibly inefficient.
Well, it would literally be a tiny little itty-bitty step in the right direction. Raising
But it's the wrong step. If you really want to help people, you have to think about the best way to help them. It's not like, this is one way that can help. Well, that's great. But we, Congress, people in Washington owe it to the people that we care about to say, sure, I could give you $1 right now, but that's probably not the best way to help you. What is a better way to do that? And I think things like jobs training programs or federal wage subsidies is just a better way to go.
All right, let's take some questions from our viewers. We have a question here from Joseph Romero. If raising the minimum wage is harmful, should there be a minimum wage at all? Julia.
I actually defer to Lori because she's ready to jump at that one.
Yeah, so I don't know that I could directly say whether or not having a minimum wage is good or bad. I think that, to go purely wonky economics, you could be like, there would be some great equilibrium and everything would even out. I do think, though, that you could do creative things. Like one of the ideas that I've seen some conservative commentators put forward to solve the long-term unemployment issue when companies aren't willing to take a chance on someone who's been out of the workforce for more than 26 weeks because their skills may have atrophied, which I think is a perfectly reasonable concern, to say we should actually lower the minimum wage for those people, and then we should have a federal subsidy that goes to make up the difference, which would encourage companies to take a risk on them, get them back into the workforce, get them off of numerous types of assistance that they're on, and reduce the assistance to just what they get through the subsidy or whatever programs they would continue to qualify for. So I do think that in some cases, I don't really want to debate whether or not a minimum wage at all is helpful, but I think that in some cases lowering it and then using federal assistance to make up the difference could be a big boon for people who are suffering.
Cole?
Yeah, I think on principle, I think a minimum wage is a good thing. But, I wanted to go back to what Alex was talking about earlier, talking about Walmart, because it's important to ask also who benefits from having low wages in this country. I think minimum wage in 1968 was around $1.50 an hour, and if you index that to inflation today, it would be around $11.50 or something like that, instead of $7.25. So that gap right there, who's been getting the profits from that? It's the employers, it's big business, it's corporate America.
That's not true at all. Who benefits from the low wages at
Walmart?
It's everyone who shops at Walmart. Walmart shoppers, which are, by and large, systematically a bit poorer than the rest of the population, benefit from Walmart's low wages.
Sure, there might be products that you can buy for cheaper prices, but
significantly cheaper prices.
But when you have to try to then find a job where the workers there are making $7.25 an hour,
You can definitely find a cheaper product that's made in China that used to be made down the street that you worked at that manufacturing plant, and that plant closed because the richest 1% has created a tax incentive structure where they make money by shipping jobs overseas, and so now you're in a situation where you have no option. You can't work at a manufacturing plant because those jobs have been sent overseas. So you do buy at Walmart, and this is the epitome of what is the race to the bottom. So yes, poor folks have to shop at Walmart more because they are poor, and Walmart is cheap. And Walmart is cheap because it takes predatory advantage of our tax structure by using its billions of dollars to influence D.C. laws and legislation so that they can create what will, in retrospect, be seen as the largest redistribution of wealth upwards since possibly medieval feudal times. So since 1980s, when productivity gains have accrued almost entirely to the richest 1%, as the middle class has either stayed stagnant or even declined some. The baby step of $10.10 an hour for folks who don't want a handout. They want the dignity of earning their paycheck. They want that. That is the part of the American dream that is critical. This is something that we should all be in support of. We should all look at how bad the structure is right now for benefiting Americans and how good it is for benefiting a few extremely wealthy folks, and it's also extremely good at sending jobs over to China. And if we don't address that, then we're only going to see this continue, and massive income inequality leads to instability every time. This is something that, if we don't turn around some of the policies, and again, raising the minimum wage to $10.10 is the babiest of baby steps in that direction.
All right. Thank you so much for the final word on that. Okay, now it's time for the most underreported story of the week. But first, I'd like to start off with our freelance writer, Julia Shaw.
So the most underreported story of the week, in my opinion, was Michelle Goldberg's report for The Nation on the feminist toxic Twitter wars. I thought it was an amazing piece, and didn't get coverage really on as much as I thought, either in the right or the left. And I thought it was a great report for two reasons. One is that the point of the report was saying that feminists are tearing each other apart on the progressive and left side, accusing each other of not being progressive enough, not being hardcore enough, because they're disagreeing over tactics. And I thought this was an amazing story because it reveals that disagreements about tactics and principles exist both on the left and the right. If this were a story about the Tea Party issue and a Republican infighting, it would be all over the news. Everyone would be talking about it. But because it was more talking about the left spectrum of the political debate, it was kind of ignored. And the other point that I thought was amazing was that the issue is about tactics versus principles. And it's so easy to accuse someone of not following the right tactics and therefore they're abandoning principles. And we see this both on the right, but we also see this on the left. So I thought it was a great reminder that the urge to be ideological exists on both sides.
Thank you. From In These Times, Cole Stangler.
For me, it was Senator Harry Reid's comments earlier this week saying that he was against Trade Promotion Authority, or Fast Track. The U.S. is negotiating some of the two biggest trade deals in history, actually, the Trans-Pacific Partnership with a number of different Pacific Rim countries, and a trade agreement with Europe. And Fast Track legislation, which the administration supports, is necessary in order to get these deals done. And I think that Harry Reid's coming out in opposition to that is a testament to the fact that you've had a lot of organizers opposing this. So both people working on the inside here in the Beltway of lobbying Democratic members of Congress to be against this, even though the administration supports it, and then on the other hand, people, environmental groups, labor groups, consumer advocacy groups, rallying people on the streets to make sure that happens. So.
All right. From the R Street Institute, Lori Sanders.
Sure. So mine is incredibly wonky and probably why it wasn't reported on this week. But perhaps unbeknownst to anyone who's watching, this week the Senate voted to delay some reforms that they made to the National Flood Insurance Program. So in case, a little bit of background in case you're unfamiliar, in the last couple of years the Senate Congress, they made some reforms to the National Flood Insurance Program, which is the program that helps subsidize you to get flood insurance if you live in a floodplain. The program is $25 billion in debt because they've never had people pay close to actuarial rates. And after several storms, that becomes a bit unsustainable. And so this week, though, when all of the rate hikes were supposed to start happening over the next couple of months, all of a sudden they couldn't stomach the fact that people weren't going to get subsidized rates anymore. And what's interesting to me about it is some people did offer legislation to ease the path, to make it easier for people who really had affordability issues. Because to be clear, what we're talking about here is mostly second homes, vacation homes, really large homes. They're in the top 1% of homeowners for the most part. And so we're talking once again about subsidies going to people who don't necessarily need them. And so there was some amendments offered to target the assistance only to people who really need it and let the reforms go into place for the rich who can't afford them, but yet the Congress still couldn't stomach to not give the subsidies to everyone. And what's incredibly interesting about it to me is that with the elections coming up in November, if there's a big storm event this year, then once again the flood insurance program will find itself broke and will have to raise its borrowing authority. And that's a really hard vote for Republicans to take, because they're saying, oh, we want this program to be allowed to go even more into debt. But they'll have to do it because they'll have to pay the claims for the people whose homes were just destroyed. So I think the Republicans may have just set themselves up for a huge October surprise right before an election that could win them the Senate. So it's still not law yet. We'll have to see what happens in the House. Hopefully they don't pass it. But it was really interesting news when Republicans hoped to win the Senate this year to maybe have set themselves up for failure.
Last but not least, Alex Lawson of Social Security Works.
I think, in my biased opinion on this one, the most underreported story of the week is Allison Schwartz, Representative Alan Schwartz, resigning her honorary chair position at both the Third Way and the New Dems, in recognition of the fact that the Third Way is a Wall Street front group, and when it came out and attacked very sensible and popular positions like expanding Social Security, which would greatly benefit the folks in Pennsylvania, that was something that Representative Schwartz said. She condemned their attacks on that policy, the attacks on senior senator from Massachusetts, Elizabeth Warren, for bringing that up. And now she's actually resigned her chair. I think that this is another piece of the story of the resurgent or rising populism that is happening in America, as more and more Americans recognize that policies are benefiting the 1% so wildly over the middle class that we need to be talking about things way bigger than a small minimum wage hike. We need to really fundamentally start thinking about policies like expanding Social Security.
All right. Well, that's all for this week. We want to thank you for watching the Square Circle. I don't know why it always comes out like that. Until next time, thank you.